Oh yes, oh yes. This video right here needs no introduction. Now, this video came up a while back, and and at that point I wasn't reacting, so this is a much overdue reaction video, man. I'm not gonna do too much talking. Before we get into the video, just do me one big favor, man. For one, if you're a Bird fan, if you Team Bird, comment down below Team Bird. Also, before we get into this video, man, smash the thumbs up button. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe. Let's get into this because we don't need to do too much talking over here.
Bird is highly regarded as one of the 10 best players in NBA history. He was highly skilled, a great scorer, as well as a great passer.
And look, before I get to this video too, before I get too deep into it, I think a lot of times certain things are took out of context, and I'm hoping that this is one of those situations where something that JJ Redick said about in regards to Larry Bird was just taken out of context. Because I like JJ Redick and I like his viewpoint on a lot of things. I think that he's actually an analyst for the most part who's pretty knowledgeable about what they're talking about. And they're not just talking from views.
To their overall success. Now, with that being said, Larry Bird, like most older legends, is losing respect as time goes on. When it comes to ESPN, I was absolutely floored to see a former NBA player insulting Larry Bird and saying point blank, he is not one of the greatest shooters in NBA history.
And I think the NBA has gotten way past the bounds and watching guys give up dunks to shoot threes on fast breaks. That kind of thing. I think that has hurt the game a lot. Now that's me. I am old school, as we all know. JJ is perfect, but Bird shot plenty of threes. And they had Parrish and McHale. Bird shot plenty of threes. The best, and Bird is one of the great shooters in the history of the sport. Not even close.
Bird shot threes. He never was a volume shooter.
No, I know that, but he was a great three-point shooter. He was not good. He was great.
So, stopping that clip right there, Redick, at the very end, had the facial expression of someone who was annoyed and disgusted by Larry Legend being called one of the best shooters of all time. And for someone like Redick, it might be hard to understand that players in the past were also great players. But for him, he is so preoccupied with boosting up today's players, he downplays and disrespects past eras, like Bird, Cousy, as well as Jerry West. Now, getting on to the actual argument, Larry Bird, in his era, there was a three-point line that was introduced his first year. But for middle school, high school, even college, he had no three-point line. And then, very important context, a lot of fans.
And then going back to this too, it's like I said in one of my videos about this, it's like even when the three-point line was actually implemented, it still wasn't a shot that was encouraged just because it wasn't a high percentage shot. So, you know what I mean? You got to take those things into consideration whenever you're discussing the greatest all-time shooter. And I understand what JJ Redick is saying because, like he said, he's not a volume shooter. He's not shooting 5+ three-pointers a game. But the three-pointers that he is shooting a game, he's hitting them at a high percentage at a time when that was frowned upon for the most part. You know what I mean? So it's like we got to find ways to give the legends of the game grace just as well as the newer age players grace. And in that terms of a lot of the old debates between new and old school basketball, the style of the game was played much differently in the previous days than it is today. So if you put Bird in an era where volume three-point shooting is a norm, who knows where he could have been at. But to sit there and say that just because he wasn't a volume shooter, that he's not a top shooter, I call bullcrap on that. You know what I mean? We got to call a spade for spade. Let's take this to example, right? Let's just say that Bird's taking 2 threes a game, and he's hitting those at a higher percentage than somebody who's taking, 5+ threes a game. So it's still, if we're going based off percentages, he still has a better shooting three-point percentage. Now, he might not got more attempts and more made because obviously the more you take, I would hope the more you make. You see what I'm saying? So we got to find ways to kind of find that common ground or that medium and be able to give grace to the older players.
And one more thing I do want to add, when Bird came into the NBA, he was actually a power forward who played primarily on the block. And despite that, in his first year in the NBA, he shot 40.6% from behind the arc. In terms of percentage, he ranked 3rd in the NBA. He was 5th in total threes and 6th in threes attempted. As a rookie off the bat, Larry Bird was the best three-point shooter in 1980. Now, what makes it even more impressive, out of the qualifiers for three-point shooting, he was the only power forward to make the list, once again proving how much of a unicorn he really was.
He's one of the top 5 3-point shooters of all time. That's how good Bird is. Oh yes,
we're not
three-point shooting contests. He was phenomenal. Bird was a great shooter.
Wait a minute,
and Bird didn't shoot
Bird is
50.
absolutely one of the
Doggy.
greatest shooters ever, but he's not
Okay.
one of the top 5
Oh,
three-point,
yes,
top
he is.
3, whatever.
Did you see the
Listen.
3-point shooting that he put on, those clinics that he put on at the All-Star game?
Again,
Did you watch?
Dog, it's just math. It's attempts, it's makes, and it's percentage. And there's no way you could ever argue Larry Bird is a top 3 3-point shooter of all time. You can't make that argument.
You're basing it
He's
on
one
math.
of the-
You're
he's one of the
basing it
best
on
shooters
math and the time of when he played. I'm basing it on just shooting.
Now, looking at JJ in this clip, he once again provides no context, saying, quote, it's about makes, attempts, and percentage. Looking at the raw numbers with no context, no data, and no additional information. That argument right there, on my stats alone, is highly disingenuous. For example, look at the mid and early 2000s. Back in that era, averaging 30 points was extremely difficult for people like Kobe, Allen Iverson, and even T-Mac. Being knowledgeable NBA fans, we know that era had a much slower pace, the paint was more crowded, and scoring was definitely more difficult. When looking at the raw stats with no context, players in today's league averaging 30 were more efficient compared to Kobe, as was Iverson. And like Reddick said, it's makes, attempts, and percentage. Someone like SGA, off the pure raw stats, was a better scorer than Pete Iverson. And someone like Tatum technically was more impressive than the early 2000s Kobe. My overall point being, stats like usual require context. The same
Well, I
thing
mean,
goes for Bird
We're gonna go
and
into that just to
Shooting.
kind of break down that right there, what he's showing, what he's saying. It's like if you look at, like, if you ask me, right, and you look at today's game compared to when these guys was doing what they was doing, today's game it's almost not even a defensive game. It's all offensive driven. Like almost every game, in the most part, in today's NBA, is 100 points plus that teams are scoring. Because so what does that tell you? That there's not a lot of defense being played. That's like even if you look at rebounding, right? You look at some of the stuff that Luka's doing as far as triple doubles. Even if you go back a couple years, you look at what Westbrook was doing as triple doubles. It's impressive. True enough, it is. I'm not discrediting that, but you got to think about and look at today's NBA. Just like what Mad Dog was saying, you got guys who will shoot a 3, who will choose to shoot a 3 in transition opposed to taking on a 3-on-1 fast break. You know what I mean? So that's today's game. It's just a whole bunch of 3-point shooting, a whole bunch of shooting, and in terms not really taking high percentage shots. So a lot of shots are being missed. Therefore, that's giving a lot of people opportunities to stat pad and get a whole bunch of rebounds. You see what I'm saying? So it's like I said, we got some things are taken out of context, and we got to find like that grace period. But we also got to be able to dig deeper and not come at it from a closed mindset and come at it with okay, let me see what can I learn from this mindset. You know what I mean?
And speaking of that percentage, looking at Bird, after 1984, when he stopped playing power forward, his overall shooting splits were highly impressive. Shooting 50% from the field, 39.8% from 3, and 90% from the line. During that time period, 5 different times he shot above 40% from 3, and his highest season was at 42.7%.
That was his 85 season.
And going year by year, in 85, he was 4th in 3-point makes, 86, he was 1st, 87, also 1st, and 88, he was 4th. For peak Larry Bird, from 85 to 88, he was 1st in 3s made, 1st in 3s attempted, and 4th in 3-point percentage. For his overall era, in terms of volume and percentage, he was the Steph Curry of the late 1980s.
Bird is a unbelievable.
Again, we had this discussion the other day. We had this discussion the other day about James Naismith. James Naismith invented the game. You were rewarded for putting the ball in the basket. There's plenty of people that have shot more, made more, and guess what? Made more at a higher percentage than Larry Bird from 3. I'm not saying Larry Bird is not one of the greatest shooters ever. He's not one of the greatest 3-point shooters ever.
Yes,
You cannot make that argument.
Yes, he
I'm
is.
sorry.
Because the 80s was so much different. His physicality, the way they bought it. You couldn't.
I've been trying to make a point. I've been trying to make a point for you, Doug.
So once again, Reddick has 0 historical context and wants to make basketball black and white and about percentage and stats. And looking at Larry Bird, like I said before, he was one of the pioneers for the high-volume three-point shooters from day one in the NBA. And for a big man, he was especially unique in his time because most forwards didn't dare step out to shoot threes. And Bird's overall influence,
And what
much like Steph
what did he
Curry,
say?
had a big
What did he say? Most what? Most forwards didn't step out and shoot threes. So what does that mean? When you have a forward, a power forward, that's stepping out behind the three-point line and shooting threes, doesn't that take another power forward out there out of the paint to go guard him? So now you only maybe have a center, but today's league, you also got center shooting threes, so it might not be nobody in the paint. So it's easy for a center or a power forward to shoot a ball and miss it. Now you got a small forward coming up with a rebound, or a point guard, or a shooting guard, and that goes on over the course of 48 minutes, and it makes it seem as if they just really hard-nosed crashing the boards, but they're not. It's just a whole bunch of low percentage contested shots being thrown up, and in returns there's a lot of rebounds. You see, I'm just saying.
in the game going forward.
For you newer style, newer basketball
and
fans.
even Jason Tatum. And one thing I do want to nail home, in 1980, three-point shooting was a gimmick and a joke for most coaches. But for Larry Bird, in a 5-year period, he legitimized it, was shooting upwards of 40%, really not knowing what he was doing for his time. And like I said before, King Larry Bird was an elite and all-time great three-point shooter. As from 85 to 88, he shot 41.4% from behind the arc, when the league average was 29.5%. Once again showing Bird was light years ahead of the curve and is a unicorn for his time period given his size, volume, as well as percentage. And one more thing I do want to reiterate is stats with zero context. As any average Joe off the street can look at a box score, look at a percentage, and read it and tell if it's good or bad. But a real smart NBA fan, what they do, they look at the context, the peak, and the overall era. As looking at raw stats as a simpleton, someone like Kobe and his career stats aren't as impressive as Damian Lillard when it comes to scoring. As Dame compared to Kobe, averages more points, a higher shooting percentage, higher three percentage, and higher free throw percentage. Would anyone in their right mind say Dame Lillard was a better overall scorer than Kobe?
If somebody say Dame Lillard was a better overall scorer than Kobe, they deserve to be slapped. I'm talking about not just a normal slap. I'm talking about slapping so hard you slap the skin off their face. If anybody says some stupid crap like that.
If looking at the numbers,
And I'm going to leave it at that.
over makes, attempts, and percentage, Dame Lillard, in fact, was a better scorer. And once again, looking at Bird, at his absolute peak in the playoffs, he was phenomenal. As an 86, he averaged 25.9 points, 9.3 boards, 8.2 assists on 52, 41, and 93 splits. For NBA history, Larry Bird was the first player ever to have a high-volume 50-40-90 postseason run. And since Bird, only KD and Kawhi have joined him on that list.
Let's say Steph Curry, for example.
Right.
When I watch Steph Curry off the ball in a playoff game,
Oh, he's great.
getting grabbed and held by Marcus Smart, they're attached to him at all times.
Right.
Then when I watch Larry Bird come off a pin down and no one's within 5 feet of him and they're shooting the gap, you're telling me one is more physical than the other? You're telling me that's more physical than Steph Curry being grabbed and held for 48
But I
minutes?
mean, it's the same thing. Now see, like I said, now I gotta get Riddick, let me put my suit on. I gotta debate you on that. And I get that. But so the same thing that you're explaining that happened to Curry wasn't the same thing that's happened to Bird. If you go back and look at the series, whenever they played the Lakers in the finals, what did Michael Cooper say? I was grabbing a hold to Larry Bird, right? So the same stuff that you're saying was happening to Curry, and I'm not discrediting that because that is facts. But the same thing was happening to Larry Bird. So that's common ground there. So we can't say that in terms of if you're saying the physicality, right? I don't know about Mad Dog. I don't really know the full. I'm gonna have to go watch that full interview, and I might do that full interview. Watch that full interview after this one. So I don't know. So I'm not gonna jump the gun on things. But I'm assuming that it came up in terms of back then being more physical than than today's league. And I don't think that right there is one way that you can gauge it being more physical, because I think that in terms of off-ball defending, it's stuff that they did back then. It's the same stuff they do now. Now, in terms of on-ball defending, hand checking, things of that nature, and some of the fouls they was doing back then, and them not being flagrant fouls, them just being standard shooting fouls, those are the aspects that make it more physical, not necessarily that. But like I say, I don't know the full context. I haven't seen that full interview, but I think that I am gonna go watch that full interview after I do this video right here.
I think Redick right there. When talking about any era of basketball, there are always good defensive teams and bad defensive
Most definitely.
teams. But for Redick, when it comes to Bird's era, he only focuses in on the bad defense. Compared to Steph's era, where he totally ignores the bad defense and the awful teams like Houston, Charlotte, and San Antonio. And as a basketball fan on YouTube, it takes about 5 minutes to find Larry Bird playing against very physical defense who grabs him, holds him, double teams him, and does all types of things to limit his shots and his shooting mistakes. And when speaking of
I know one of my subscribers commented, was like, try not to pause in the middle of talking. I understand, but it'd be so hard for me to keep quiet. But even going back to this, you can go back to college when they lost to Magic in college. What did they say they did to Indiana State? They double bird the whole game. So it's like, come on, man.
the 80s, when it came to Pistons, they had Dennis Rodman, Joe Dumars. The Lakers had Cooper and Worthy. Philadelphia had Bobby Jones and Caldwell Jones. Players like Allen Robinson, Larry Nance, Sidney Moncrief, Buck Williams, who had great defenders on all-time great defensive teams. And just like Redick, I could cherry pick bad plays here, bad plays there, from any era. At the end of the day, it makes no sense doing that. You have to watch the film, understand the era, and provide context to what you're watching.
And
Yes,
to what
back
you're
in the
speaking
day,
on.
They played very close and compact to the basket. That's because back then, they didn't know the value of three-point shooting. But someone like Bird was a pioneer and innovator of three-point shots for big men and just players in general. And one last thing I do want to throw in there, looking at Larry Bird, Mad Dog Russo brought up the NBA Finals. For Bird in the Finals, for his career, in 5 trips collectively, he shot 42.2% from behind the arc. And when it came to clutch time play, in the final 5 minutes, shot a staggering 42.8%. If you look at three-point shooting for Larry Bird, at the biggest times when the stakes were highest, he elevated his game and rose to the occasion. And like Pat Riley said, Larry Legend is the guy you want taking the shot when the clock's winding down. So that right there is my last overall point. And when it comes to Bird, I personally think he's a top 10 shooter of all time. If you want to say top 5, I definitely wouldn't push back too heavily given his era and how good he was for his time period. And for Redick, as you guys know, I am not a big fan of him or his takes regarding past legends. As always, thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time.
Let me know what you guys' takes. I know y'all about to go in the comments. I already know. So I don't even think I gotta say that, but just to get clarification, just to make sure we're on the same page, let me know what y'all think in the comments, man. But as you can see, that is it for this video. If you did enjoy this video, do me a big favor, man. Smash that thumbs up button. Also, if you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe. When you subscribe, click that post notification bell. That way you be notified on all things Rob Sports Center. Because just like the GOAT Drizzy Drake say, man, I'm coming back to back with these videos. I'll see y'all in the next video.